So hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining and thank you for enduring a small technical hitch there in joining us today in our new series here. Um, for those of you who haven't joined a Tribal Experience webinar before, my name is Jamie. I'm the Business Development Director here at Tribal Worldwide. And I help lead the ideation and creation of the strategies and propositions for any new clients considering to partner with Tribal. And for those of you who haven't heard of Tribal before, we are the total experience agency, and what we mean by that is we think beyond established customer experiences and work with brands to innovate in their customer journeys, whether that be from online to offline or out of home to in store, as well as internal engagement processes and procedures. To create ecosystems that build better products, services, communications, and ultimately better businesses. And these events really help us do this by bringing together industry leaders from a diverse range of sectors and companies to provide new points of view and learn from each other on how we can deliver new, better, and more total experiences that change the face of businesses to better serve their customers and deliver more value. Some of you may have attended our previous webinar series talking about some of the impacts and challenges around COVID, and this new series is called Stronger Than Before, where we'll be speaking with industry-leading experts from both the client and agency worlds that are really at the sharp end of ensuring that they emerge stronger than before. And we'll be asking them about how they pivoted, innovated, or launched new products, services, and experiences that created richer connections with their customers to drive commercial success. So really excited that this is the first event in this new series, and today we're going to be discussing innovation at the British Red Cross. We'll be finding out all about their cash card hardship fund, which is helping the most vulnerable during the coronavirus crisis, and hopefully uncovering some best practices that you might be able to adapt to the opportunities and challenges that you may be facing in your own companies. So really excited to be joined today by Ben Holt, the Technical Innovation Lead at the British Red Cross. Ben has a master's in innovation, creativity and leadership, and likes to combine critical analysis of the present with creative storytelling and a deep knowledge of technology to imagine new futures. Ben's got a proven track record of delivering complex digital projects and groundbreaking innovation in the humanitarian and charity sector. Ben previously redesigned the innovation system for the UK's largest charity, Cancer Research UK, he now leads technology innovation at the British Red Cross, with his most recent project allowing him to reimagine the future of cash transfers in humanitarian responses. We're also joined by our very own Adam Powers, our Chief Experience Officer at Tribal Worldwide here. Adam leads the customer experience practice at Tribal and is a creative and strategic senior leader, successfully operating at the intersection of design, experience, and technology for, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, for over 25 years. He's built and led high-performing teams on some of the world's most iconic brands, both client-side and agency-side capacity, and is also a member of the Design Standards Board at the General Assembly, a Creative Council member at BEMA, as well as a BEMA Awards judge, and is also a trustee and board member at CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, so has his fingers in lots of pies. So welcome, Ben and Adam, and I guess just wanted to start off, Ben, perhaps with kind of a bit of an introduction from yourself as to what the sort of new proposition has been about, and just to give everyone a little bit of background as to what it is really.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So I joined the Red Cross in January in this new role, which had been created to look at emerging technologies, alternate futures, and to sort of challenge some of the thinking around where resources and strategy were heading. And obviously, the virus arrived and set everything sideways. And so, very quickly, I was asked to start to set up a hardship fund, which was funded by a corporate partner, Aviva, who made some money available to us. And the intention was to help the people in the greatest financial need during the current crisis. And there were aspects of cash assistance programs happening across different bits of the Red Cross with very developed, sort of forward-thinking, thought leader type team in the international directorate, and some smaller scale pilots and experiments happening in other parts of the operations. So it was a question of surfacing those people, pulling them together. Oh, hey guys, sorry. Hello? Sorry, Jim, I can't hear a word you're saying, mate. Because you're muted or because,
Sorry, Ben, are you still with us there? Sorry.
hey,
There we are.
yeah, I am. I don't know what happened then. Sorry about that. Technology, you see, always gets in the way of talking
I
about
know,
technology.
absolutely no. I caught most of that around the hardship fund. No, I know it's a really it's been a really interesting project for you to spin up, and one of the most interesting things for me, and I've experienced this with other brands that we've spoken to in our previous series, is just how quickly businesses can get things done when they need to. Tell us a little bit about the sort of timeframes that you were working to launch this, and what you experienced in kind of those initial kind of days and weeks in getting this off the ground.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, given the urgency of the crisis, the needs were there immediately. And so we had to work as quick as we can to stand this up, whilst balancing that against the scalability of the system and the security of the system, and making a sort of sound choice in terms of where we invest our time, money.
Yeah, and
I to build.
I think we're being plagued today, aren't we, Ben?
I know, I know. I don't understand what's going on. It's my broadband. It's been right for weeks. Typical. Anyways, sorry about that.
That's okay. Um, so sorry, we haven't had these issues before. Apologies to everyone. See, uh, bit of maybe bandwidth issues coming on there. Perhaps if chaps, if we turn our videos off, maybe to help the bandwidth, maybe that might improve things here. So we just do that now. Yeah, so sorry, Ben. So just as you were saying there, sort of the time frames. Let's just sort of revisit that. 'Cause I think sort of the audio dropped out there.
Yeah.
The sort of time frames and the importance, the important being leveraged on being able to get this off the ground really quickly. What was your experience in kind of working this through in the business?
Yeah, so obviously, with the crisis unfolding as it did, the needs were immediate and acute. And so we had to work as rapidly as we can, whilst also respecting, the data security, the scalability of the system, and the longevity of what we were building. I didn't want to cobble something together that was only going to work for a few weeks and then have to be replaced. And redone. So it was balancing, speed versus the robustness of the system, which was the tricky thing to get right.
Mm, absolutely. And what I know that when we were speaking about this, we talked a lot about the service design as an approach here. Um,
Mm.
Tell me a little bit about that and how that sort of the role that played in sort of bringing this to life.
Sure. So this was an interesting project, and it unfolded in an entirely new context, really. We were transitioning, like everybody else, into remote working. We were scrambling to make sense of what was happening to the world around us because of coronavirus. We were looking for technology which could be spun up quickly, could be trusted, like I mentioned, but then also trying always to put the user at the core of that. Now, exactly who those users were and what they needed was evolving as quickly as the situation around us. And so we were spinning up sort of parallel streams of work, obviously closely interlaced, but trying to design that user journey and trying to make concessions for or find solutions to the new constraints imposed by coronavirus was quite tricky. And so we had the operational side of stuff going on where we were trying to define the criteria for people to be eligible for this fund. We were trying to figure out the best route to reach those people and actually find the people in greatest need. And in parallel, trying to design a system which was going to work for those users, for our internal needs, and in the longer term. So yeah, it was a tricky puzzle to unpick, to be honest.
Mm. And Adam, I know that sort of service design as an approach is something that you've dealt with as well in the past. So really keen to sort of get your thoughts around sort of the importance of this as an approach methodology, sort of moving forward as these customer experiences become increasingly important.
Yeah, I mean, wanting to keep the focus on Ben because obviously what he's talking about is riveting, but I do think that there's this challenge around being able to take in the customer experience in its entirety, what's happening front of house, what your customers or end users are seeing, all the way back past the point of interaction through to the things that are happening behind the scenes, the technologies, the systems, the processes that are supporting it. And something we touched on, Ben, when we spoke earlier in the week that really struck me or the need for your critical assessment of things that were happening across the business already to help you accelerate into delivering this service. And I think that's, we see that with a lot of clients. They're kind of daunted by the fact that are looking at kind of or getting projects to market. And the thought of them building on a greenfield site is frankly terrifying. But obviously, the imperative of COVID, the need to get something to market that was effective and targeting absolutely the right people. I'd just be interested in your approach in how clearly you had to create elements that were new off the back of this in a very short time frame. But what was the process in identifying the tools that existed already that you could use, and clearly through we talked about the kind of swim lanes of activity across different parts of the business that either supported you or hindered you. The evaluation of that must have been quite a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's that's a fair way of putting it. So for me, anything that's innovative is new and useful and can ship and scale. And so lots of innovation gets stuck in the new bit. You spend a lot of time dreaming up what might be possible and what the perfect solution might be, and
Yeah,
big bold future visions, which is great. But useful means you can actually do it and you can deliver it, right? And in this
yes,
instance, that utility was absolutely vital because we knew there was people out there in significant need. And so what did we have in place? Now we've got an international directorate within the British Red Cross that responds to emergencies globally and plays that role in the international Red Cross movement. They have a cash team. Normally, they would be sent into the aftermath of, you know, tornadoes, floods, natural disasters, into refugee camps, etc. And there's a slightly different set of needs and a different set of constraints and a different project and program design.
yeah,
A lot of expertise there. We've got UK operations who deliver those frontline services for the Red Cross and have begun to look at how we might use cash there. So if people, for example, have lost their homes in a house fire or been forced out of them by a flood, we were beginning to experiment with offering those people a prepaid cash card. And then our refugee services were looking at rolling cash into their refugee support as part of their casework. So we will work with people to help them access, legal support, housing, and cash can play a role in there. So there was all these little elements dotted around, which to me, we could draw on their expertise, we could draw on the discovery work and the legal discussions and the partnerships they'd built, bring it together, look at what we've got, and from that, draw out something which is going to service our needs and allow us to move faster than we might otherwise have been able to. So that's what we did. And so it was a really interesting collaboration between the technology side, the international emergency response side, and the UK frontline operations.
You still with me, Ben?
Yeah, I'm still there. Did you lose me?
Okay, fantastic. So we're obviously hopping on and off audio here, but I guess extending from that, you needed a kind of militant focus on who this was there to serve. Can you describe a bit for us, actually, from their perspective, what did success look like? What did you need to provide? Because you're talking to people that didn't necessarily have a bank account, that didn't have those safety nets potentially in place, or those access points in place that you might rely upon. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So the mandate of any humanitarian organization is to help the people in greatest need. And so you have to find ways to reach those people and not to, there's obviously needs along the way. There are people who need help all over the place, particularly at the moment. But you're right, that focus on where is this going to deliver the biggest impact or where the needs are greatest was key. And that required that input from those frontline, British Red Cross services. They work with people all the time, face to face, usually, mask to mask or online now. And so for us, where was there a gap in what you might call this market of support, right? So we were looking at people who had no other way to access funds. So that would maybe mean they were destitute prior to COVID, or they had been forced into that situation by it and were not able to access other means of support. So it would be people who have potentially been forced out of their homes by domestic violence and are locked out of bank accounts and are in a hostel. It might be people with irregular legal status, immigration status. It might be people who are struggling to provide the documentation or access the benefits system. And so how do we reach those people and how do we deliver cash to them in a timely manner in a way that's going to work was the kind of critical thing that we had to figure out. And obviously complicated by the fact that we can't go door knocking and opening offices and inviting people in. So yeah, that was all these extra elements contributing to this puzzle we were trying to unpick.
And I guess building on that, I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is, and certainly I've seen this with Calm, there's an enormous challenge that some of the activities that charities have relied upon have just not been functioning over the lockdown period. It's the case that you're not directly involved in fundraising, but I think there was an interesting point just before the call started where we talked about the kind of diversification of portfolio. So it's slightly tangential to the project, but I am interested in this kind of change of approach. That's actually frankly, not just in the charitable sector. We're seeing retailers having to reimagine their proposition as a result of not having bricks and mortar stores open, that people that have perhaps noodled around the edges of e-commerce prior to lockdown, all of a sudden there's a kind of urgency there that they have to get into that, otherwise their business is at risk, frankly, if not severely limited. Where do you I mean, what's your position on that? Because it was clear earlier on that you do have a view on the kind of diversification of the charitable sector.
Absolutely. So yeah, I am a firm believer that the sort of traditional and established charity model is ripe for change, and there's a lot of opportunity within that market for new ideas. And there's a lot of amazing work happening across the sector to uncover these. I mean, it's not like I'm saying anything that people haven't recognized. I mean, they can be hard to deliver, but that, that's the trick, right? So, traditionally, people had spare cash in their pocket. They were willing to trust the charity brand with that spare cash to do good. Humans are altruistic at core, right? We like to help other people generally. And a business is built up around that. And over time, I think charities have tended to look inwards a little too much. They compete with each other to be the best charity within the charity sector, to come up with that new idea for a fundraising event, that new idea for how to kind of retool their charity shops, or that new marketing campaign that sells them as a charity, which is fine and it's vital work and it does good stuff. But at the same time, there's a new market which is really growing in strength, which is this for-purpose market. And there's a whole new bunch of entrants to that, which I think are now challenges to the charity sector. So these are businesses and startups who are really looking at their core social purpose and how they make a positive impact on the world through their businesses. And they offer a whole range of different stuff, from bank accounts and electricity to clothing, food, and suddenly people can choose to do good with their cash in different ways. And if you can choose an organization which, like, Patagonia is the huge example of it, right? They're billions of dollars, they're huge, but you can actively choose, I'm going to buy my jacket from them because then I feel like I'll get a jacket, but I'm also contributing to a good cause. And there's more and more examples of that happening within the charity sector. But I see a lot of issues within organizations trying to get momentum with those new ideas.
Really interesting conversation, guys. What I'll say is to our attendees as well. Any questions that you may have, please submit them in the chat or directly to me, and we can get them answered. Ben, I mean, I'm really interested to understand, what you and the business has learnt from this, and kind of what perhaps behaviours, processes and cultures you think that you'll want to kind of carry through into the future, into future sort of projects that you may work on.
It's worth prefacing this with the fact that the Red Cross is a huge organization and it is itself very diverse. There's a whole bunch of different entities under that Red Cross brand who have all been responding to this, and that goes from sort of subcontractors and commercial arms for the NHS providing services, shops, commercial first aid training, through to the kind of more traditional charity thing. And they've all been responding and all uncovering new ways of working. There's a central innovation team who have been working on some amazingly powerful stuff. There's some fundraising work happening as well, obviously. So at the minute, all of that information and those new ideas is being collected. We're coming back together now. The initial onslaught of urgency is kind of calming down. From my side, from what I've experienced there, I think that it showcases that stuff can happen a lot quicker than you think. It shows that sometimes when people tell you that the issue is capacity, or we can't do that, we don't have capacity, it's not the case. The issue is bureaucracy and the processes put in place to access the resources. And so there's some really interesting conversations going on now about how might we strip some of that back, allow a leaner, faster, and more robust way of piloting, particularly in the new technology space. I think there's an issue previously where, you can see a demo of technology and then you decide, oh yeah, let's procure it. There's a big gap in the middle where I would want to be running real live pilots with stuff and experimenting to build a business case and allow that evidence that we're generating through those experiments to influence strategy and resourcing. And that's been quite interesting. And I guess finally, it's broken down a lot of barriers. We've worked across these different directorates, which are all nominally Red Cross, but all have very different cultures and ways of working and thinking. And that's been a challenge at times, right? When you're working with people with very different expectations of what a project looks like, or what hierarchy looks like, or what experiments look like. And I think that's been thrown into stark relief. And there's going to be some interesting conversations about what the sort of chosen winner or the kind of dominant way of doing things is going to be.
Mm. And Ben, when you and I were talking last, I know that we joked that perhaps it could be the title of your book, but frugal innovation as a methodology is something that you spoke about. I'd love to sort of hear a bit more about sort of your thinking behind that and how that was applied in this instance.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning that I did this master. So I spent many years working for Medicine Sans Frontières, so working in digital and transformation, both in their kind of UK headquarters and frontline projects. So it's really interesting to see the gap at times between like brilliant ideas that work wonderfully when you've got fiber broadband in Silicon Valley versus what works actually on the front line, on the ground, and where you need it. And that sort of got me thinking about the fact that we often use methodologies that we've inherited from business or we've got from a book. Then they might work beautifully in other circumstances, but they don't necessarily deliver things that are going to thrive in the context in which we work, whether that's overseas or whether that's here, trying to work with these really disadvantaged and disenfranchised communities. And so frugal innovation is really about flipping it on its head. Rather than taking stuff that's maybe been successful in a commercial world and stripping it back and extracting a kind of .org version and trying to use that, start from the other end. Like, look at where you're trying to work, look at who you're trying to work with, look at what is available, and look at the characteristics that a solution needs to thrive and survive in that space. And so I tend to go back to this like mnemonic that came out of my research then, which is surpass. And that is looking at solutions which are sustainable, robust, purposeful, as in they're very focused on the thing they want to impact, affordable and simple. And as you go through your innovation process, at all stages, if you keep referencing them, and it helps you strip out some of the like brilliant ideas that are never going to come down to the price point that you need, for example, or are going to be way too complex to function in the context where you need them to. And by applying those constraints, like it seems the opposite of what you would expect, there's the horrible blue sky thinking, anything is possible. Well, anything is possible until you try and deliver it in the real world at the right price point. And so having constraints allows you to kind of focus your solution on things you know are going to give it that extra chance of working. And I've seen that work really well, because then when you are working like with Silicon Valley developers to try and deliver something that's going to work kind of off-grid in Zimbabwe, they get it in a way that they might not otherwise. So yeah, I'm a firm believer in that as an approach.
Really interesting.
I'm really struck also by, over the years, seeing lots of innovation teams and labs units come up with really terrific ideas that end up withering on the vine, that never scale or don't get adopted. And I'm interested, I mean, this sounds like an approach that addresses some of that head on, but I think also what sometimes misses a trick is that if you're not thinking, if part of your innovation strategy doesn't include, I don't know, finance, HR, system, how do you inject those innovations back into the core business so that they take flight and take life
absolutely
as usual, rather than always being a sideshow? I'm kind of interested, do you find your methodology just naturally enables that to happen because you've taken this approach?
I mean, I don't think there's anything. It's not. This is still a struggle, right? It's not natural, but it makes it easier. I think you're absolutely right. Like, the phrase pilotitis is one that strikes a chord with me. Like, pilots are easy, really, because they're on a life support machine. They've got real attention from the people who love and care about that pilot. They might have, artificial levels of cash supporting them. They might have different expectations in terms of tech support they get, for example. So the pilot in principle works, but as soon as you transition it to BAU or to the market, it just fails because it's never going to work without that life support system. So you're absolutely right. So there's a really good paper or theory which came out of ThoughtWorks by a guy called Dan McClure, and he calls it. He talks about the missing middle. So this is why things don't scale, and it's that black box, blue sky, whatever you want to call it, innovation, where stuff is done on a blank sheet of paper with no reference to the kind of world it's going to end up in, which can be brilliant. It can spark awesome, fantastic ideas. But what you have to do after that is design back in the constraints that it needs to survive, whether that's like as fixed as the sort of legislation. Come up with a brilliant idea, but if it breaks laws, it's not going to work. So how do you build in, whether that's like the materials that are not safe enough or the data protection is abysmal or whatever, you can't launch it. So the idea is brilliant. You haven't included the complexity it needs to survive. And there's all sorts of interesting ways in which you can re-add that complexity after you've done your initial complete free thinking. And then the trick after that is, okay, well, we've got the brilliant idea. We've got all these constraints that need to be applied to it. And how do we design them back out of it again in a way that means that they don't interfere with the user experience? That's the kind of real art of it.
Right. Jamie, do we have any questions from our attendees?
We do have a couple. I mean, Ben, I know that sort of your role is very specific within the Red Cross, and that, as you say, it's quite a large organisation with sort of multiple stakeholders. So these may not necessarily be in your wheelhouse, but we've had a couple of questions really around sort of the sort of digital channels being used. Sort of one around kind of Sarah wants to hear more about sort of the British Red Cross and TikTok partnership, how that came about, what technology is involved, etc. Whereas Rebecca is kind of wanting to understand what the Red Cross has changed about the way it uses technology and digital channels in order to respond to the crisis. So kind of linked but different questions there. I don't know if any of that kind of is something you've touched within the business at all.
Well, in broad terms, the use of digital channels and technology, like everywhere, has been thrust to the fore. Right? Suddenly, just the discussions and debate before any decision and project was reliant on digital technology. And that forced through a real acceleration in the way that we've deployed, various systems and platforms. We brought forward the rollout of one back-end system by 6 months to facilitate the just the work of the business, let alone the services and content, etc., that we deliver. So there's been a big change there in that people have, even those who were reluctantly digital, are realizing that actually these are fundamental tools now for the business, and the way in which we deploy them has changed quite dramatically. I think that by necessity, there's been a challenge to what I see happening sometimes is like people come to you and they're experts in their particular area of the business and they want you to replicate their current paper processes in a digital system. That's not a sensible way of working. And I've seen a few projects which have struggled because of that. So having people who can help unpick what the actual problem is and what sort of open people's eyes to what technology can do has been really interesting, because that's allowed us to kind of accelerate again the stuff that we offer. But in terms of the stuff around like the social and TikTok and stuff like that, that isn't something I've been working in. I mean, my job is really, it's about looking further down the road, like what technology is emerging, what's not being used in the sector widely, or in our business specifically, and how do I build evidence and stories around what that might do for the business longer term.
Interesting. And then so on that future vision, note then, I mean, is it too early to say, or have you are you seeing any trends in obviously what this year essentially has had as an impact on businesses, and how we've talked a lot about this in previous episodes around changing consumer behaviours. Be interesting to see what behaviours that have changed in the short term will endure, and what what will just sort of revert back to normal. But that future has there anything kind of come up over the last few months that you think you've kind of looked at and gone, you know what, I think that's something we need to look, keep an eye on over the next 12 to 18 months.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the key thing is that it's accelerated stuff and it's broken down a lot of barriers, right? There's been a lot of resistance to the sort of more transformational shift to digital in some organizations. But when you're faced with the fear of COVID, the fear of digital transformation is lessened. And talking to friends who work in that space, so like Dan Such from the Catalyst, which is a brilliant project looking at the sort of digital infrastructure and literacy within the charity sector. Speaking to him, he just said that it's just gone. Like, organizations are realizing they have to shift to new ways of working and new platforms to survive. So that's been really interesting. But then in the specifics, the one that I'm now looking at, now the hardship fund's up and running, we're delivering these cash cards. People are able to sort of manage and activate them remotely with text and all this business. I'm turning my attention to robotic process automation because I think that that's a really interesting area, not only because it frees up people to focus on complex problems by taking some of the weight of the kind of manual and repetitive processes off them. It can really help just embed digital technology in a new way, so it becomes a kind of underpinning service and support to everything else that you do. But I also think longer term, it's got massive potential for the way that we sort of respond fast and scale when these kind of crises hit.
Definitely.
Have you got any kind of specific examples around the application of that, Ben? Because again, there's a lot of interest in from kind of automating call center triage, so that the incredibly, often undervalued call center teams who've got an incredible amount of knowledge are actually, as you say, answering the really gnarly calls or the challenging responses rather than the kind of layers of filtering that sometimes can overwhelm them. In your head, are there those kind of immediate smart applications of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a shared service center which services the whole organization's kind of a lot of their admin needs, processing the accounts and invoices and triaging, managing those calls, etc. And there's a huge amount of manual processes that go on within that, right? Whether that's as simple as opening an email, renaming an invoice, saving it in a specific place, responding to queries with standard boilerplate content and stuff like that, and all of that, a lot of that can be automated, particularly when you're working across different systems, moving and opening an email, extracting something, saving it here, logging it in this other system. Those things which people do, and it's in people's heads, and it takes a lot of time, and it's a grind. You can make that a lot easier. So you get these, robot digital workers working alongside your human staff. So it does exactly what you said. It frees people's time up to answer those phones, to turn their attention to some of the things which have been pressing and needing addressing, but have been pushed back and back and back just because of the ongoing workload of keeping your head above water. So that's really, really interesting and will build interest, I think, within the business. But it also speaks to a resourcing issue where the risk with the digital transformation is that your digital team, technical team, if it becomes a bottleneck, they're forced to prioritize all these demands because people are suddenly, people want a lot more technical support, and it can be very difficult to deliver that or to fund it, right? If you've got a technology director with his own budget and they can hire X amount of people, but the needs are growing, you start asking those other directors, well, you need to pay for, if you have this platform that needs this support, you're going to have to pay X amount for this % of a dev or a UX or whatever. Now, the digital workers, the RPA stuff can really push that because there's a quantifiable easy cost. You go, well, I can automate that for you and it's going to cost $8,000 a year. Do you want me to automate it, which will free up more of my capacity to address these new business ideas or these new process ideas? So I think that's going to be quite interesting because it will challenge not just the way we use technology, but the way we resource and staff it as well.
Agree.
Really interesting. We've had a question submitted here. How ready do you feel, how digital ready do you feel, Ben, that the charity sector was pre COVID-19, and how digital ready will they be, post this? You mentioned a lot about kind of sprints of innovation that have come out from this. Do you think there's a lot of hard lessons being learned in your sector? How ready do you think your sector was, and do you think that's something that will carry through?
I mean, I think it has had a dramatic impact. It's hard to speak of the sector as a whole because, when one end you've got organisations making 660 million a year. The other end you've got people from home volunteering and raising a few £1,000s for a specific cause. So the spread of digital infrastructure literacy is very different, and there's some amazing initiatives happening to help that vast bulk of charities, which are small, sort of passion-driven projects, to access technology and to support their cause. And in those instances, that's brilliant. So like the Catalyst that I mentioned, they're doing amazing work in that space. Across the kind of bigger professional organizations, I don't know, it's a tricky one to answer because there's amazing work happening. There's brilliant things happening, but I've always experienced like a degree of there's tension and there's friction and there's things that get slowed down because of internal politics and bureaucracies. And that might be as simple as senior leaders who they're not interested, or they don't get it, or they don't come from a digital background. So they see it as a kind of nice back office service, not as fundamental to the delivery of their services. I think that's what's changed. People's eyes are suddenly fully open to the necessity and the potential of digital technology. So I think it'll be interesting to attend board meetings and SLT meetings in the future. I'd be interested to see what the composition is like and how power might shift within these organizations. That'll be the real telling legacy of this. If people who have been pressing for change suddenly get elevated into senior roles and are allowed to initiate the change, that would be the power.
Interesting. Yeah, good point. Yeah, so I get what I sort of getting kind of into the final sort of 15 minutes here, Ben. I'd be interested to sort of hear, if what would be kind of, we've got a lot of charities on this call today, and as you've already said, a range of shapes and sizes of business. I suppose for people listening to you go, gosh, I wish I could do something like what the Red Cross has done there. Just, what would be your top piece of advice, to your other fellow charities, when it comes to, conceiving, planning, activating, and making a success of such projects within a charity? Be your top kind of piece of advice and takeaway from today's webinar.
So I always think that technology and change are an interesting combination, because the beauty of digital technology is that you have access to a vast amount of data because of it. So you can build rock solid business cases, and you can test things in a really powerful way that allows you to push back against some of the accepted hierarchies. I used to do that all the time at MSF. Someone would pop up and say, I want this to do this, or I want this to say that. And I go, okay, we'll test it. Fine. We put it into our testing program. We come back with the evidence and go, you were right. Or look, it doesn't work. And that's good because that educates people. So you build your data, use that as an ally. But I also think that the other part of it is the storytelling side of stuff. So being able to imagine a different future, being able to tell a story about what the world might look like. And with that, you can offer multiple alternatives, right? If we do this and we invest and we go this direction, then the world might look like this. If we choose this path and we do the other thing, then the world might look like that. And again, there's so much out there that you can draw on to build those stories. And that can be a really brilliant way to bring people along, because technology can sometimes, people ignore it, or they don't embrace it because they don't understand it at times. They find it boring and difficult to get their heads around. But those inspiring future stories, that's what's going to mobilize everybody. If imagine a world where our business did blah, blah, blah. And then I guess finally, the prototyping, testing, experiments are so cheap now. You know, when I worked, we set up a sort of side business, a standalone entity for CRUK that was designed to develop new business models. Three of us trying to do this, to introduce this diversity. So we didn't have a lot of resource or time, but the experiments we ran were like standing outside supermarkets with a tray full of different snacks, asking people for their receipts, going shopping with people. So we were looking at, obviously a food and obesity focused project here. But if you can find amazingly cheap ways to build that evidence and tell those stories, and so you know, get cracking. You don't need everybody on board to start. You'll get them on board through doing that.
Mm.
It's interesting, Ben, that you know you got your ethnographic study hat on there with the tray bakes outside the supermarket, talking about the kind of piloting. It does seem to me, you know, you've mentioned Catalyst a couple of times. So obviously they're helping the sector improve their digital capabilities. I do wonder sometimes as well within the sector whether they could afford to be a little bit more playing in the open of some of these pilots and prototypes, so that there's an opportunity to raise all the boats. Clearly, they have their own kind of passion points and areas of support and services they need to deliver. But
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I think also in a kind of climate without politicizing it necessarily, where they're kind of self-reliant as a group, it would be really interesting to see what you know, how that might be facilitated.
Yeah, but I'd love to see more collaboration and shared infrastructure across the charity sector. I mean, that way lies strength, right? It pains me, and I talk to agencies that make the money off this, and it pains them to see, you know, decent sized charities all paying 100 grand or whatever for basically the same CMS and a back end for their websites, where there's solutions which could be bought once and distributed multiple times. And for me, organizations, big charities with a lot of money investing a huge amount in technology, really, to me, they have a moral obligation to open source that and to make it available to the rest of the sector, because if not, you're competing with each other. Whereas actually, we should be focused on our social purpose. All charities are there to solve complex social issues. They should be freeing up as much time, resource, and imagination as possible to focus on that. If you're spending a huge amount of time, resource, and imagination to service the back end of your website and your databases and stuff, they're essential, that you need them, but surely we can collaborate, share, and free up capacity to focus on those real social issues better. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
I guess coming from the agency sector, I think it wouldn't hurt for us to take a good look at ourselves and see our responsibility to be initiating some of those conversations in those kind of big agency network groups that we find ourselves as part of, to be more collaborative and come out too.
I think there's a really good opportunity for agencies in there too, because more traditionally you would have that, you know, issue an RFP, sort of interview your agencies, pick one for the delivery of this discrete chunk of work, and then, you know, say goodbye to each other. Whereas the model I'm seeing emerging is that much more collaborative, exploratory relationship, which both allows the charity to meter its funds and make sound bets, and it allows the agency to build longer term relationships. So maybe you don't issue the RFP with all the details and commission somebody to build your huge back-end system. Maybe you just pay for a week-long sprint and the agency brings its network to bear, brings brilliant people together, you tackle the real problem you're trying to solve, come up with some beautiful ideas, and if there are no beautiful ideas, well, fine, it didn't work, but you haven't lost a huge amount, which you would have done if you just commissioned the thing to start with. But then good ideas emerge. Okay, well, now it's becoming a product, and you start developing that product team relationship with the agency, and perhaps over time that allows you to bring that in-house and learn those skills. But I think that, yeah, there is definitely a potential to sort of shift the agency model towards that.
Yeah, I think at a human level, I can speak for Tribal when I say our people love working on those kinds of projects, particularly where there's an opportunity to genuinely, you know, make a difference on top of everything else that they do. So I don't think the motivation wouldn't be lacking for sure.
I think everybody likes working on it. It's great. It's nice to have those long-term relationships and to unpick tricky problems and to find unexpected solutions. I mean, that's ace, isn't it?
Excellent. Well, look, we're sort of getting to the last sort of 5 minutes where I'd usually sort of say, if there's any sort of final questions from the audience, please submit them. Firstly, a huge apology to everyone today. With some technical issues we've had. Sort of hopefully everybody that wanted to get in has managed to get in and has got some value from today. We'll make sure we solve those problems for the next event. And this will sort of be a series. So please look out for information on some follow up that you'll receive. And that will contain sort of all the information of the next upcoming events, how to register, etc. We may hold off on that until we can make sure we solve the technical issues there. But I think everyone will agree it's been really interesting hearing from Ben today. What a great case study, Ben, for what you guys have achieved in such a short space of time, and Adam, sort of really interested here in kind of your point of view as well from the agency side. And I think clearly in the last sort of 10 minutes there we were chatting, there's a lot of synergy in I think what everyone's feeling and what everyone wants to accomplish, and essentially what gets us all out of bed in the mornings to do what we do. So I genuinely hope that that mentality and that way of working will come through, and obviously sort of wish you, Ben, all the success in the world with this new initiative and for any future ventures that Red Cross sort of launch. Please give us a follow on LinkedIn and Instagram, Tribal Worldwide London, using our hashtag Total Experience to share any thoughts from this morning's session. And I really appreciate the time today from both our panelists, Adam and Ben, and from our audience as well. I wish you all a really productive end of the week, and obviously most importantly, stay safe and keep well. So thank you very much, Ben and Adam. I think we'll leave it there for today.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Take care, guys.